The attack on the hospital ship. The stars glowed softly, stretching across the vast emptiness of space. The hospital ship, Healing Horizon, drifted peacefully through the dark void. It wasn't a warship, and it wasn't built for combat. Its purpose was simple: to provide medical aid to those in need, no matter where they were in the galaxy. The ship's crew, made up of doctors, nurses, and medical experts from Earth, had no idea that they were about to face something far worse than anything they had ever experienced. The ship's sensors hummed quietly, scanning the surrounding space. It had been a routine mission, stopping at different stations to deliver medical supplies and offer help to various alien species who were injured or sick. But there was something off about this part of space. The crew couldn't put their finger on it, but the calmness around them didn't feel right. Without warning, the sensors blared to life, breaking the silence with a sharp tone. The ship's AI, a soft, mechanical voice, came through the intercom. Warning: unidentified ships detected, closing in rapidly. A wave of tension swept over the crew. The captain, Commander Sarah Hayes, stood up from her seat, looking at the ship's display screen. The unknown ships were coming in fast, and they didn't seem to be broadcasting any identification signals. Sarah's heart raced. It wasn't uncommon for there to be occasional pirates or troublemakers in deep space, but this felt different. "Are they armed?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but strained. "Yes, Captain. Weapons systems activated," the AI responded. "They appear to be targeting us." "Shut down all non-essential systems and prepare for evasive maneuvers," Sarah ordered. She knew this could turn into something far worse, but she had to stay in control. The crew worked quickly, their movements swift and practiced. Medical staff quickly moved to secure patients, some of whom were still recovering from previous injuries. Others rushed to ensure the safety of the ship's most vital systems. Meanwhile, Sarah looked out the front viewport of the ship. The unknown ships were getting closer. Then came the first shock. A loud bang echoed through the ship, followed by a violent tremor. The lights flickered, and an alarm began to blare, signaling that the ship had been hit. The crew stumbled but quickly regained their footing. The ship's shields had absorbed much of the blow, but the impact was enough to cause some damage. The attackers were already firing again. "Return fire," Sarah ordered. She was a commander of a peaceful medical ship, but now she was faced with a very different reality. She had no idea who these attackers were or what they wanted, but she wasn't about to let them destroy her crew. The hospital ship's weapon systems, though not as advanced as a warship's, still had some defense mechanisms. They weren't designed for direct combat, but the ship fired back, sending warning shots toward the approaching ships. The attackers ignored the warning. They were here for a purpose, and it was clear they didn't intend to leave without accomplishing it. Another strike hit the ship's starboard side, sending sparks flying through the walls. The crew braced for impact, but Sarah's focus never wavered. She knew they needed to get out of there, fast. "Activate the engines, full power," Sarah commanded. "Get us out of here." The crew scrambled to follow her orders, but the damage to the ship was starting to take its toll. The hospital ship's engines hummed, struggling to push them into higher speed. It wasn't enough. The attackers were still right behind them. "Incoming," the AI shouted, moments before another barrage of fire rained down on them. This time, the impact was harder, and the ship shuddered violently, throwing crew members to the ground. "Hold on," Sarah shouted, holding onto the console in front of her. She could feel the tension growing in her chest. The enemy ships weren't just trying to disable them. They were trying to destroy them. "Communications," Sarah asked, gritting her teeth as another blast hit the side of the ship. "We've lost all external communication, Captain," the AI replied. The crew was now in full panic mode, trying to stabilize the ship as the attackers closed in. Sarah looked at the damage reports flashing across the screens. They were getting closer to the heart of the ship, where the medical bay was located. They couldn't allow that to fall into enemy hands. Suddenly, a message crackled over the intercom. It was static-filled, but there was a voice coming through. It was a garbled alien language, one that Sarah had never heard before. There was no way to understand the message, but the tone of the voice was unmistakable, aggressive and demanding. "Who are they?" Sarah whispered to herself, her mind racing. They were ruthless, determined to wipe out anything in their way. Another loud explosion shook the ship, and Sarah had to brace herself against the console to stay upright. The walls around them were starting to burn, and the air became thick with smoke. She could hear the distant screams of her crew, trying to keep their medical patients safe and maintain order in the chaos. Her hands tightened around the command chair. She had to find a way to survive this. They couldn't just keep running. They needed backup. They needed help. But what she didn't know was that help was closer than she thought. Deep within the depths of space, Earth's war fleet was already on the move, and the attackers, whoever they were, had made a grave mistake by choosing the wrong target. The healing horizon rocked once again, the force of the enemy's weapons pushing the ship further off course. The crew scrambled to keep their feet as the overhead lights flickered and alarms blared relentlessly. The hospital ship, built for care and healing, was now fighting for survival. Sarah Hayes gritted her teeth, holding onto the console, determined to stay calm. "Damage report," she shouted, trying to cut through the chaos. "Captain, we've lost power to the starboard thrusters. Shields are failing at 40%. The voice of Lieutenant Garcia crackled through the comms. "We're not going to last much longer if they keep hitting us like this." Sarah clenched her fists. They were running out of options. She needed to get in touch with Earth's fleet, but the comm systems were down. The attackers had been smart enough to jam their communications. Whoever these enemies were, they knew exactly how to strike fear into the hearts of anyone unlucky enough to cross their path. "Can we get a distress signal out?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the growing panic around her. "We're trying, Captain," came the response. "But the enemy has blocked all frequencies. The best we can do is hope they don't destroy us before we can get the backup we need." The ship shook again as another series of blasts hit. The crew was now working in a blur of frantic action. They had to keep the ship intact, protect the patients, and find a way to get Earth's military to respond. If they didn't, there was no chance of survival. They were sitting ducks in the vastness of space. "Keep trying to get the signal out," Sarah ordered, her voice like steel. "We need Earth's help now more than ever." At that moment, a sudden thought flashed through her mind. It had been years since she had heard about the Titan fleet, Earth's secret military force. It was a rumor, a story whispered in corners, often dismissed as fantasy. But Sarah had heard enough to know that it wasn't just a story. The Titan fleet was real, and it was powerful. If anyone could come to their rescue, it would be them. Sarah quickly typed in a series of commands on her console, hoping against hope that the encrypted channel she was about to activate would still be functional. The message she sent was simple but desperate. "Mayday. Mayday. Healing horizon. Under attack. Need immediate assistance. We are in the Crimson Nebula system." It was a shot in the dark. She didn't know if the message would get through, but she had to try. If the Titan fleet was real, they would have received the signal by now. If not, then they were truly alone. For what felt like an eternity, the ship drifted helplessly, shaking and groaning under the repeated attacks. Then, just as Sarah was about to give up hope, something unexpected happened. The alarms that had been blaring nonstop suddenly went quiet. The ship's damage control systems automatically stabilized the shields for a brief moment. It wasn't much, but it gave Sarah just enough time to take a breath. "Captain, we've established an emergency channel," Garcia announced, his voice filled with disbelief. "It's a secure frequency. We got through. Somehow." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The message had gone through. "Any response?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, and then Garcia spoke again. "Yes, Captain. We've got a response. It's Earth's military." Before Sarah could speak, a voice came through, strong and commanding, cutting through the static. "This is Admiral Carter of the Titan Fleet. We've received your distress call. Hold on. We're coming." The words brought a rush of relief, but Sarah didn't have time to let her guard down. She still had a battle to win. The attackers were closing in fast, and the healing horizon was not designed for combat. It was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. "We need you to move fast, Admiral," Sarah said, her voice urgent. "We can't hold them off much longer. They've already breached our defenses, and our power systems are failing." "We're on our way," the Admiral's voice crackled back. "Prepare for emergency reinforcements. We'll break through their lines and get you to safety." Sarah nodded, her fingers flying over the controls. "Understood. We'll do everything we can to keep the ship intact until you arrive." The next few minutes felt like hours. The crew worked in a synchronized frenzy, managing to keep the healing horizon from falling apart as it drifted further into enemy territory. Sarah knew Earth's warships were on the way, but the question remained, could they get there in time? And what would happen if they didn't? The enemy ships, sensing weakness, moved in even closer, their weapons targeting the ship's engines. Sarah knew that if they lost power now, it would be the end. She had to buy the crew as much time as possible. The Titan fleet was coming, but in the silence that followed the last blast, Sarah knew there was still a storm ahead, a storm that would change everything. If Earth's fleet couldn't get there in time, they would be forced to face the attackers alone. And these enemies, they had made a grave mistake. The healing horizon drifted, its once pristine white exterior now scarred with scorch marks and dents. The calm, peaceful hospital ship had been turned into a battlefield, its walls echoing with the frantic sound of alarms and the hurried footsteps of crew members trying to maintain some semblance of order. The attacking ships, sleek and dark, circled around them like vultures, their weapons trained on the helpless vessel. Sarah Hayes, captain of the Healing Horizon, stood tall in the command center, her face a mask of determination. But even she could feel the pressure building inside her chest. "We've got incoming fire, Captain." Lieutenant Garcia called out from his post, his voice strained. "They're not giving us any time to recover." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she watched the status screens flash warnings. Their shields were barely holding up, and the power levels were dropping with every passing second. The enemy ships seemed relentless, firing relentlessly at the ship's vulnerable spots. If they didn't get help soon, the healing horizon would be nothing more than a floating wreck. "Prepare the emergency escape pods," Sarah ordered. Her voice was calm, but deep inside, a part of her feared that it was too late. "And make sure the patients are secured. We can't risk them being caught in the crossfire." Garcia nodded, his face pale. The healing horizon had always been a sanctuary, healing the sick, providing medical care to those in need. But now, it was a target. And if they couldn't stop the attackers, it would soon be a tomb. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently, a deafening explosion ringing through the air. The force of the blast sent everyone crashing to the floor. Sarah's head slammed against the console, and for a moment, everything went black. When she regained consciousness, her vision was blurry, and her ears rang with a dull hum. She pushed herself up, her hand shaking as it gripped the edge of the console for support. The command center was a mess. Debris scattered across the floor, sparks flying from damaged panels. She could see the concerned faces of her crew members, but all she could think about was the urgency of the situation. Time was slipping away. "Report," Sarah managed to croak. "Captain, we've lost all auxiliary power," Garcia responded, his voice tight with panic. "Our backup systems are offline. The hull is compromised, and we've got multiple breaches on the starboard side. We can't hold out much longer." Her heart raced as she listened to the dire news. The attackers were getting closer, and without power, they would be sitting ducks. "Can we restore power?" "Anything," she asked desperately, her mind working quickly to find a solution. I don't know," Garcia admitted, his voice breaking. "We can try to reroute the systems, but we're running out of time. They've breached the medical bay. Captain, they're getting closer to the core." Sarah's eyes widened. The medical bay. That was where the patients, innocent civilians, were housed. If the attackers got there, there was no telling how many lives would be lost. They couldn't let that happen. Not after everything they had fought for. "Activate the ship's defenses," Sarah commanded. "Even if we don't have full power, we need to protect the medical bay at all costs. Is there anything we can do?" Garcia's fingers flew over his controls. "I'll try to reroute power to the primary weapons system. It's a long shot, but we've got no other choice." The ship jolted again, this time more violently. The lights flickered as the hull groaned under the stress. Sarah knew that the enemy was getting closer. She could feel it in her bones. Every second that passed brought them closer to annihilation. But then, just as her hope began to fade, a voice crackled over the comms. A familiar voice. "This is Admiral Carter of the Titan Fleet. Hold tight, Healing Horizon. We're inbound. We'll break through the enemy lines. Stay strong." The words were like a lifeline thrown into a storm. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was the confirmation she had been waiting for. Earth's Titan fleet was on its way. Help was coming. They weren't alone anymore. But it wouldn't be enough to simply wait for rescue. Sarah knew that. She had to do everything in her power to protect the ship, the crew, and the patients until help arrived. "Garcia, reroute all remaining power to the shields. We need to buy ourselves time," Sarah said with a firm voice. "We've been through worse, and we will get through this too." Garcia nodded, his face pale but determined. "Understood, Captain." The ship shook once more as the enemy's fire hit the hull again. Sarah gritted her teeth, her hand clutching the arm of her seat. The tension in the air was suffocating. Every impact brought them closer to the edge. Then, just as the situation seemed hopeless, a bright flash lit up the distance outside. It wasn't a blast from the enemy. It was something else, something bigger. Admiral Carter's voice crackled over the comms once more. "Brace yourselves. We've arrived." The relief that flooded Sarah's chest was immediate, but she didn't have time to relax. Earth's fleet had arrived, but the battle was far from over. It was only the beginning. As the Titan fleet tore through the enemy lines, Sarah's crew fought valiantly to keep the Healing Horizon afloat. With Earth's might backing them, the attackers' confidence began to falter. The fight was shifting, and now the attackers would feel the full wrath of Earth's vengeance. The tables had turned. The warship that had once been on the edge of destruction was now in position to strike back. The battle was about to take a dramatic turn. And for Sarah Hayes, this fight was far from over. The stakes had never been higher, but she was ready. She had no choice but to be. The Healing Horizon was still in shambles, but the arrival of Earth's Titan fleet had brought a wave of hope. Sarah Hayes stood at the command console, her eyes fixed on the now active communication channel, as Admiral Carter's voice crackled through, loud and clear. "Captain Hayes, we've locked onto your coordinates. Reinforcements are coming in hot. Hold your ground. We'll clean up the mess." Admiral Carter's voice was steady, but there was a deep urgency in it. The fleet was pushing forward, ready to reclaim the ship and its crew. But Sarah knew the battle wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. "We're with you, Admiral," she said, her voice strong despite the exhaustion pulling at her. "We'll keep the attackers distracted. We've got this." She turned to Lieutenant Garcia, who had just managed to stabilize the remaining power in the ship. The damage to the shields had been severe, but the crew was working around the clock to keep the Healing Horizon in one piece. "Lieutenant, how much longer until we can get the shields back up to full strength?" Sarah asked. Garcia wiped sweat from his brow and looked at the screens in front of him, his fingers flying over the damaged controls. "It's going to take a few minutes, Captain. We've rerouted what we can, but it's a patch job. If they hit us again, we won't have much to work with." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. They didn't have minutes. Every second counted. The enemy ships were relentless, their fire never slowing. But now the tide of the battle was changing. With Earth's fleet closing in on the attackers, they had a slim window to push back. Garcia, reroute all power to the forward-facing cannons. Let's make sure they know we're not helpless, Sarah said, her voice firm, despite the growing tension. Garcia hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Understood, Captain. The Titan fleet had arrived, but the enemy was still fierce. Sarah couldn't afford to waste a single moment. The attackers would do everything they could to break through Earth's defenses. She had to ensure the healing horizon could hold long enough for reinforcements to make their final push. Outside the ship, the battle raged on. The dark silhouettes of enemy ships circled the healing horizon, firing laser blasts that illuminated the black expanse of space. The explosions rocked the ship with each strike. Inside, crew members scrambled to reinforce critical areas, running down hallways and ducking behind cover to avoid the blasts. "We've lost contact with some of the escape pods, Captain," another officer shouted from across the room. "The attackers are targeting our evacuation routes." Sarah's chest tightened. The patience. They were depending on the escape pods to get to safety. If those were taken out, their chances of survival would drop drastically. "Garcia, can you reroute the auxiliary power to the escape pod launchers?" Sarah asked, her eyes scanning the screens. "We need them operational. Now." "It's risky," Garcia replied, his fingers hesitating above the keys. "We're already at critical levels. If I do that, we may not have enough energy to keep the shields up." "Do it," Sarah said, her voice a mix of resolve and desperation. "We're not letting those people die. We fight for every life on this ship." With a swift nod, Garcia punched in the commands. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The low hum of the ship's engines was the only sound, accompanied by the steady beeping of the alert systems. Then the ship trembled, and the emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie glow over the command center. "Escape pods are launching," Garcia shouted. "They're clear of the hull. We've given them a chance." Relief washed over Sarah, but it was short-lived. The attackers were still closing in, their ships darting toward the healing horizon with terrifying speed. They weren't going to stop, not without a fight. "Admiral Carter," Sarah said, her voice steady but urgent, "we've done what we can here. It's all on you now." A brief pause followed before Carter responded. "You've done well, Captain. Hold tight. The cavalry is on its way." As if on cue, the Titan fleet advanced, breaking through the enemy's outer defenses. Waves of fire erupted as Earth's warships deployed their advanced weaponry, cutting through the attackers with brutal precision. Massive explosions lit up the space around them, illuminating the stars. Sarah watched, her heart racing, as the fleet pushed forward. The healing horizon was still standing, but only by a thread. The crew had done their part, fighting back with everything they had. Now it was up to the Titan fleet to finish the job. The enemy ships faltered, some trying to retreat, others seemingly oblivious to the rapidly closing gap. But the Titan fleet was too powerful. One by one, enemy ships were disabled, their systems fried by the full might of Earth's technology. "We're gaining the upper hand," Garcia said, sounding more confident now. "The enemy's breaking apart." The ship shook again, but this time it was different. The blasts didn't have the same force, and the ship didn't seem to be taking as much damage. Sarah could see the enemy forces retreating, their ranks scattering in chaos. "We did it," she whispered, watching as Earth's fleet decimated the remaining enemies. "We actually did it." With the enemy scattered and the healing horizon safe for the moment, Sarah allowed herself to exhale for the first time since the attack had begun. The battle was far from over, but they had won this fight, and Earth's vengeance had been swift and unrelenting. But Sarah knew one thing for sure: this war was only just beginning. The attackers would pay for their actions, and Earth would make sure of it. The silence that followed the battle felt strange. The sounds of the raging war outside had stopped, and now there was nothing but the soft hum of the ship's remaining systems. The healing horizon was still floating in the vast expanse of space, a battered survivor, but still alive. The crew had done everything they could. Now, all they had to do was wait for Earth's fleet to finish cleaning up the mess. Sarah Hayes stood at the command center, her hands gripping the edge of the console as she surveyed the damage on the screen. The ship was badly damaged, but there was still life within its walls. The enemy ships had been defeated, scattered, and destroyed, but the aftermath was something that couldn't be ignored. "Report," Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with exhaustion. A junior officer looked up from their station. "Captain, all escape pods are accounted for. Most of the patients have been transferred to safety. There were some casualties, but we've saved the majority. Medical teams are working round the clock to stabilize them." Sarah nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She felt the weight of the battle pressing on her shoulders. The loss of life, the destruction, it was all too much to bear, but she knew the price of victory. "Good work," she said, trying to mask the guilt that threatened to rise in her chest. "Keep me updated on any new developments." As the officer nodded and returned to their duties, Sarah turned her attention to the view outside the ship. The Titan fleet was still in motion, sweeping through the debris of the battle. Massive ships, their weapon systems still active, surveyed the area. The enemy ships had been destroyed, but there was no sense of victory in Sarah's heart, only the cold aftermath of war. Just then, a communication channel opened, and Admiral Carter's voice came through, steady and calm. "Captain Hayes, you did well today. Your crew's courage will not be forgotten," Carter said, his voice offering a rare moment of warmth. "But the war's not over. We'll need to keep fighting if we're going to protect Earth and the people we've sworn to defend." Sarah's heart beat faster as she listened to Carter's words. The war was far from over. The attackers, whoever they were, had made it clear that they would stop at nothing to achieve their goals, and Earth's response had been swift. But Sarah knew they couldn't stop here. There were more battles ahead, more enemies to defeat, more lives to protect. "I understand, Admiral," she replied, her voice now firm with resolve. "We'll keep pushing forward. We'll fight to protect everyone we can." Another pause came through the communication line before Carter responded again. "We're sending reinforcements to your location. The healing horizon will be patched up as best as we can. Earth's fleet is already preparing for the next phase of the war." "Understood," Sarah said, her gaze never leaving the view outside the ship. She had seen enough of the devastation to know how dire things were, but she also knew that Earth wasn't a species that backed down. And neither was she. As the Titan fleet regrouped and began to shift positions, Sarah allowed herself a moment of reflection. The battle had been brutal, but they had won. They had survived. And now, they had the chance to strike back. In the quiet of the command room, Sarah felt the tension of the last few hours lifting, but only slightly. The reality of what had happened was starting to set in. She had seen the destruction, the fear in the eyes of the crew, and the determination that had driven them all. It wasn't just about the healing horizon, or even the lives they had saved. It was about the fight for Earth's survival. She reached out, tapping a few keys on the console, bringing up the information about the enemy ships that had been defeated. But one thing caught her eye. A transmission had been intercepted. It was an encrypted message, coming from deep within enemy territory. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the code. Whoever these attackers were, they were not ordinary. They had a purpose, a plan, and Sarah had a feeling this was only the beginning. The message was broken, but some of the words were clear. Retaliation. Earth. Prepare. Sarah's blood ran cold. Retaliation. They weren't done yet. Earth was not safe. She quickly forwarded the encrypted message to Admiral Carter, knowing this would change everything. The war had only just begun, and the enemy wasn't done with them. The healing horizon had held strong. The Titan fleet had arrived just in time. But Sarah knew, deep in her gut, that the real test was yet to come, and Earth would be ready. She would make sure of it. Days passed after the battle, but the tension never left the air. The healing horizon had been patched up, though it would take time before it was fully operational again. Sarah Hayes could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on her. The victory was bittersweet, as she knew the enemy wasn't done. Their encrypted message had been a warning, a promise of things to come. The Titan fleet was still out there, circling the outskirts of enemy space, preparing for the next battle. But Sarah knew that this would not be an easy war. The attackers had proven their ruthlessness, and they had only scratched the surface of Earth's resolve. Earth had a fleet capable of taking down the invaders, but the enemy was getting smarter, more dangerous. In the briefing room, Sarah sat with Admiral Carter and several high-ranking officers. They had just received new intel from their spies, and it wasn't good. Captain Hayes, Admiral Carter began, his face grim as he looked over the data. The message we intercepted wasn't just a warning. It's an invitation. The enemy is gathering their forces in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. They're preparing for a full-scale assault on Earth. Sarah felt her chest tighten. She had suspected that the fight wasn't over, but hearing it out loud made the threat real. "How long do we have?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We don't know," Carter replied. "We've sent reconnaissance drones to gather intel, but they're still too far out. What we do know is that they've united a coalition of species, all with one goal: to destroy Earth. We've underestimated them before, and we won't make that mistake again." Sarah's mind raced. She thought of the healing horizon and how it had survived despite the odds. She thought of the many lives they had saved, the many more they would need to protect. "We can't wait for them to come to us," Sarah said, her eyes hardening with resolve. "We need to hit them first. If they're gathering an army, we need to stop them before they can attack Earth." The officers around the table nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. Sarah had proven herself as a leader before, but now, more than ever, her decisions would be critical. Earth couldn't afford to wait. Admiral Carter leaned forward, his fingers tapping on the console in front of him. "We've been preparing a fleet of our own, but we need to move quickly. If we strike at their base now, we may be able to cripple their supply lines before they're fully ready. But it's going to take everything we've got." "We have no choice," Sarah replied. "We strike fast and hard. We don't give them a chance to recover." The room fell into a tense silence as everyone processed her words. The plan was risky, but it was the only option: a full-scale attack against Earth's enemies before they could launch their retaliation. It would be a gamble, but if they succeeded, it could end the war before it had a chance to truly begin. "Prepare the fleet," Sarah ordered, her voice unwavering. "We leave at dawn." As the officers dispersed to carry out her orders, Sarah remained in the briefing room, staring at the map of the galaxy on the wall. Earth's enemies were scattered, but they were building something far worse than a mere army. They were creating an empire. And that empire was bent on Earth's destruction. Sarah clenched her fists, knowing what had to be done. There was no turning back now. Earth had been attacked once, but they would not let it happen again. The fleet was ready, but so was she. It was time to show the galaxy what humanity could do when pushed to the edge. The Titan fleet was already assembling, massive ships lined up in perfect formation, ready to move out. Sarah watched from the observation deck, her thoughts focused on the mission ahead. The crew of the Healing Horizon would be there too, standing alongside the Titan fleet. They had already proven their courage. Now they had to prove their strength. As the hours passed, the fleet grew larger and the tension grew with it. The war was no longer about defending Earth. It was about ending the threat once and for all. Sarah could see it in the eyes of her crew. Their resolve had hardened, and there was no turning back. The attack would begin soon. As Sarah made her way to the command deck of the Healing Horizon, she thought of the lives at stake. She thought of the civilians on Earth, the families who had been affected by the initial attack. They were counting on them, and Sarah would not fail them. She would not let Earth fall. The enemy had made their mistake when they attacked the healing horizon. Now, they would face the full force of Earth's vengeance. The Titan fleet would not stop until the last of their enemies was destroyed. The countdown began. Earth's fleet would strike first, and they would strike hard. There was no time to waste, and Sarah was ready. The battle for Earth's survival had begun, and there was no turning back now. The engines of the Titan fleet roared to life as Sarah Hayes stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the vastness of space ahead. The time had come. They were entering enemy territory. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Earth's vengeance would be swift, and it would be devastating. "Captain, all systems are operational," reported Lieutenant Ortega, her voice steady, yet filled with an undertone of anticipation. "We're ready for the final strike." Sarah nodded, though she didn't speak. She had been ready for this moment for a long time. The Titan fleet, a collection of Earth's mightiest warships, was fully prepared to deal with the coalition of species that had dared to threaten humanity. They had already taken down the Titan vanguard and crippled their supply lines. Now, it was time for the final confrontation. The enemy's base lay ahead, a massive asteroid fortress surrounded by a fleet of warships. It was heavily fortified, but Sarah knew that they could still strike at its heart. The key was to disable the defenses before they had a chance to retaliate. She had no intention of letting the enemy escape a second time. "Steady, everyone," Sarah called out to her crew. "This is the moment we've been waiting for. Remember, we fight not just for ourselves, but for every person on Earth who can't defend themselves. We make them pay for what they did to us." Her words were met with a chorus of determined affirmations. The crew, despite their exhaustion from the previous battles, was ready. They had been through hell, and now they would deliver justice. "Target locked on enemy fortress," reported the weapons officer, Lieutenant Moore, launching missiles in 5 seconds. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. The missiles fired in a perfect volley, speeding toward the enemy's asteroid fortress. She watched as the explosion lit up space, the shockwave rippling through the void. But the enemy wasn't finished. Their fleet moved to intercept, and chaos broke out across the battlefield. The Titan fleet was not alone in this fight. Sarah had gathered ships from every corner of Earth's territories, from every surviving nation that had joined the fight. The healing horizon was in the front lines, its medical crew ready to tend to the wounded and assist in the battle. But this was not just a mission to save lives. It was a mission to ensure humanity's survival, to ensure that the galaxy knew they could never be pushed around again. "Captain, we're taking heavy fire," Ortega warned. "Shield strength is dropping. Maintain formation," Sarah ordered, her voice calm. "Return fire. We need to keep their ships occupied." The enemy was ruthless, but Earth was not afraid. Sarah's fingers danced across the control panel, targeting the most dangerous enemy ships. The Titan fleet fired back with unrelenting force. The enemy ships began to break apart, their shields crumbling under the pressure of Earth's weapons. It was an overwhelming show of force, one that Earth had been forced to develop over the years, a direct result of their refusal to be cast aside. But Sarah knew they couldn't afford to take too long. The asteroid fortress was still operational, its defenses stronger than anticipated. She needed to find a way to breach its core, to destroy the heart of the enemy's operation. "Lieutenant Ortega, prep the boarding teams," Sarah ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We're going in." The crew quickly scrambled into action. Boarding pods were loaded and ready to launch, carrying teams of elite soldiers who would board the fortress, disable its core, and neutralize the enemy command center. The mission would be dangerous, but Sarah had no doubt in the capabilities of her team. They were the best of the best, trained for situations like this. Boarding pods away, Ortega reported as the pods launched into space, heading directly toward the enemy fortress. The battle outside was intense, but Sarah's mind was focused on the operation within the fortress. Time was running out. As the last of the enemy ships fell to the might of Earth's fleet, Sarah could see the boarding teams make contact with the fortress's outer hull. The moment they breached the walls, they would be in enemy territory. The final push was underway. "Captain, enemy command center is located on the central platform," Lieutenant Moore reported. "We have the coordinates. Deploy the rest of our forces to secure the platform," Sarah said. "No one gets away." With a final surge of firepower, the remaining enemy forces were overwhelmed. The last of the defending ships were destroyed, and Earth's forces were closing in on the central command. The boarding teams had made their way to the heart of the fortress, and within minutes, the command center was neutralized. Sarah's heart raced as the mission reached its climax. The enemy's fortress was now crippled, and their leadership was captured. Earth had succeeded in its vengeance. A message came through the comms, crackling with static, but clear nonetheless. It was from Admiral Carter, back on Earth. "Captain Hayes, we've received your report. The enemy is retreating. The galaxy will remember this day. Humanity has proven itself unstoppable." Sarah exhaled, feeling the weight of the battle lift from her shoulders. They had won. The war was not over, but this victory had shattered the enemy's resolve. Earth had shown the galaxy what it meant to be pushed to the edge, and what would happen if you tried to destroy them. Earth was not to be underestimated. As the Titan fleet began its journey back to Earth, Sarah felt a sense of pride and relief. Humanity had survived, and now they would thrive. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. There would be other battles, other threats, but Earth was ready, and with their fleet, their determination, and their newfound strength, humanity would not just survive. They would rule the stars. The final victory was theirs.